Kessia had never asked for gold, but she gave it freely. She believed that when you marry a man, you build a family, not just a home. So she lent, she sacrificed, she smiled when they asked for more. Until one morning, while eating plain bread on the veranda, she saw the headline, "Lavish Wedding for the Beloved Daughter of Chief Teboho." The photos, paid with her money. The bride, her sister-in-law. The silence that followed would cost them everything. Kezia was wiping dust from the glass table in the living room, the one she had saved up for and gifted to the family after marriage. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Absent-mindedly, she opened it. Her heart paused. It was a wedding video, full of gold decorations, a sparkling white dress, a grand ceremony. But it wasn't just any wedding. It was her sister-in-law's wedding, and right there in the caption were the words, "All thanks to our amazing family for making this dream come true." Kessia stared, confused. No one had told her about this. Not her husband, not her mother-in-law, not anyone. They had planned everything behind her back. They didn't ask her to come. They didn't even send an invite. She sat down slowly, her hand trembling. What hurt wasn't just the wedding. It was realizing that her hard-earned money had been used for something so big, and yet she wasn't considered important enough to be there. She remembered all the times they came to her with soft voices and guilty smiles. "We just need a little help," they'd say. She gave them money for house repairs, new clothes, even for urgent family needs. Now she saw where it all went. The flowers, the photographers, the band, all bought with her sacrifice. And no one thought to say thank you. In that quiet moment, sitting in a house she helped build, surrounded by things she paid for, Kezia didn't cry. She didn't scream. Instead, her mind became very clear. She had always thought love meant giving without asking. But now, she saw it differently. They didn't forget to invite her. They never planned to, because she wasn't family to them. She was just useful. Kezia's heart didn't break. It changed. Something inside her stood up, not out of anger, but out of awakening. She finally understood what they thought of her. And from that second, she promised herself, never again. Never again would she give without thinking. Never again would she let herself be used. What they did wasn't just betrayal. It was a lesson, and she was ready to learn it well. From the very beginning, they treated Kezia with sweet words and warm smiles. They called her the daughter we never had. At first, it made her feel special, like she finally belonged. Whenever someone in the family needed help, it was always her phone that rang. "You're the only one working," they'd say gently. "Just this one time, dear." And Kessia, with a soft heart and the hope of being accepted, always said yes. She helped pay for the broken pipes when water flooded the kitchen. She covered the cost of groceries when there was nothing left to eat. She even bought new glasses for her mother-in-law, who cried and hugged her saying, "You're such a blessing." Every time, Kezia told herself, "It's okay. That's what families do for each other." But deep inside, something didn't feel right. It was always her giving and them taking. They never said, "Let's pay you back," or "thank you." They just moved on to the next request. And each time she helped, the next favor came quicker. They didn't even ask with hesitation anymore. It was expected, like it was her job. She started to notice how they never turned to her husband, their own son. Even when he was free, even when he had something small saved, it was still Kezia they ran to. One time, she gently asked, "Can someone else handle this one?" Her mother-in-law smiled and said, "But you do it best, my child." And just like that, the guilt returned. She felt trapped again, like saying no meant she didn't care enough. But after the wedding she wasn't invited to, Kessia saw everything clearly. All the times they praised her, it wasn't love. It was strategy. They knew how to make her feel responsible, how to make her believe she owed them. They wrapped every request in emotional words, but all they saw in her was money. She wasn't their daughter. She was their invisible ATM, always working, always giving, never asking questions. They never hugged her because they missed her. They hugged her after a transfer. They never called to check on her health. They called to ask for a little support. And now, thinking back, it all made sense. She had built their comfort with her sacrifices. And what did she get in return? Exclusion, silence, disrespect. That hurt more than anything. Not because of the money, but because she finally saw the truth. She wasn't loved. She was used. And that, she decided, would never happen again. Kessia sat across from her husband, her heart heavy, but her face calm. She asked him softly, "Did you know they used my money for the wedding?" Tebaho looked surprised. He rubbed the back of his neck and said, "They said they'd pay you back." I didn't know all the details, but something in his eyes didn't sit right with her. It wasn't just confusion, it was guilt. She didn't argue, she didn't cry. Instead, she stood up, walked to the bedroom, and pulled out a folder she'd kept hidden for weeks. Inside were screenshots, receipts, and voice recordings. One by one, she laid them on the table. Transfer logs showing large amounts sent from her account to his sisters. A voice note from her mother-in-law saying, "Don't worry, she'll help. She always does." And worst of all, an invoice from the wedding planner, with Kessia's name written under the payment source. Tebaho's face changed. The lies couldn't hide anymore. Everything was clear now. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This wasn't about a few missing details. This was planned, carefully, quietly, behind her back. And her husband, the man she trusted, had either helped or watched it all happen. Kezia remembered all the times she had asked simple questions and they brushed her off. "It's just small family stuff," they said. "You don't need to worry." But now all the pieces were in front of her. The truth stared her in the face. And for the first time, she didn't feel confused. She felt awake. They didn't care if she struggled. They didn't care how much she gave. As long as their needs were met, her feelings didn't matter. They made her believe they loved her. They made her feel like she belonged. But all along, they were only taking, planning, using. She looked at Teboho again. He stayed silent. Not because he had nothing to say, but because he knew the truth was too loud now. Kesia stood up, her voice steady but cold. "This wasn't a mistake. This was a plan. And I was the fool you all used to pay for it." No more soft smiles. No more fake thank you. She was done. Done being quiet. Done pretending not to notice. She had been more than generous. She had been blind, but not anymore. And in that moment, standing over a table filled with evidence and broken trust, Kesia made a silent promise to herself. This would be the last time they used her without consequences. Kesia woke up early that Thursday morning. Rain was falling gently outside, tapping on the windows like a soft warning. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes, staring at the wall, breathing quietly. Then, she stood up and reached for her small suitcase. It wasn't fancy. It didn't need to be. She wasn't going on vacation. She was leaving something much heavier behind. The weight of being used, ignored, and taken for granted. She folded just a few clothes, packed her ID, some cash, and her phone charger. That was it. No drama, no noise. She didn't rush. She moved like someone who had already made peace with the decision. The house was silent, except for the ticking clock and the sound of rain outside. Teboho was still asleep. Kesia looked at him one last time, not with hate, but with finality. He wouldn't hear shouting that morning. He wouldn't get a fight. That's not what she came to give. She walked to the dining table and gently placed the house keys there. That table had seen her serve meals with love. That table had heard her laugh, cry, and beg to be seen. Now, it would only hold silence. A message written without words. "I'm done." She didn't leave the house in anger. She left in peace. But not the kind of peace that comes from happiness. It was the peace that comes after realizing your worth and knowing you've been giving it to people who never deserved it. As she stepped outside into the rain, the cold drops touched her skin. But for once, she didn't feel cold. She felt free, not just from the house, but from the lies, the guilt, the weight of always having to be the good one. She wasn't just walking away from a home. She was walking out of their control, out of the prison of silent suffering they built for her. No goodbye letters, no dramatic phone calls, just one quiet, powerful exit. And that single step out of the house was the start of a different kind of story, one where she was no longer the background helper, but the main character. They wouldn't know it yet, but they had just lost the only person who truly cared. And Kesia, she was done begging to be seen. From that day forward, she would only go where her heart was respected, not where it was used. Sometimes the loudest message comes from silence, and Kesia's silence that morning would echo louder than any words ever could. After Kesia left the house, there was complete silence. No calls, no texts, no explanations. Her husband and in-laws waited, thinking she would come back after a few days. Maybe she just needed space. Maybe she was being dramatic. But days turned into weeks, and Kesia stayed gone. They didn't know where she was, What they didn't realize was that while they sat in confusion, Kezia was not crying in a corner. She was planning. In a small apartment across town, Kezia sat with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Someone who knew how to handle people who thought they could get away with financial abuse. They went over bank statements, message screenshots, and all the receipts Kezia had saved. Every single thing she gave them, every transaction, every voice message. It was all lined up like puzzle pieces falling into place. Then came the meetings with the financial analyst. They helped her understand where every naira went, how much was lost, and how it could be legally claimed. Kezia sat there, focused and calm, taking notes, asking questions. She wasn't just looking for revenge. She was building a strong case, not from anger, but from facts. Not with noise, but with power. But the person who gave her the strongest support was her godmother, a wise, firm woman who had been through her own share of betrayal. When Kezia told her everything, her godmother didn't say, "I'm sorry." She simply said, "If people misuse your kindness, send the invoice to their karma or their assets." That line stayed with Kezia like armor. It gave her strength. It reminded her that she wasn't weak for giving. They were wrong for taking advantage. Kezia wasn't planning to beg for her money back. She was preparing to make them pay it, legally, publicly, and with interest. She started keeping records of everything, even the praise messages her mother-in-law had sent, calling her their biggest helper. All of it would now work in her favor. While the family still believed she was off somewhere nursing her wounds, Kezia was in meeting rooms, printing files, organizing evidence. She didn't need to scream or curse anyone out. Her silence was already working harder than any argument ever could. And this time, she wasn't acting out of guilt or fear. She was moving with purpose, slowly, quietly, smartly. The same silence they thought was weakness was turning into her biggest strength. They had no idea what was coming. But soon, they would understand. The same woman they once ignored was now the one preparing to teach them the most expensive lesson of their lives. Kezia walked into the courtroom with calm steps and quiet confidence. She didn't come to argue or scream. She came with proof and a plan. Her lawyer submitted a civil suit, backed by clear, strong evidence. Every transaction she made for the family was carefully documented. The transfers, the bills, the money she was asked to send just to help. All of it had a paper trail. One by one, her lawyer handed the judge bank records showing money sent from her personal account to her in-laws. There were also printed voice notes where her mother-in-law was clearly heard saying, "Kezia, you've helped us so much. You're truly our biggest blessing." She even referred to the money Kezia gave as investments for the family's future. Those words were now working against them. Then came the wedding planner's invoice, with Kezia's name listed as the payment source. It was undeniable. This wasn't about small family favors anymore. This was financial exploitation, and the court could see it clearly. The judge didn't take long to respond. He looked at the documents, listened to the recordings, and asked a few questions. It was obvious Kezia had given more than anyone should ever be asked to, and without fair treatment. The court ruled in her favor, but it didn't stop at just returning her money. Because of the depth of deception, the stress, and the emotional damage caused by the misuse of funds, the court added something more: interest. 25% legal interest on top of everything they owed. That meant the family had to return not just what they took, but a much larger amount. Then came the biggest blow. The judge signed an order to freeze all their family bank accounts until the debt was paid. The mother-in-law's saving, the sister-in-law's joint wedding account, even Tebaho's business wallet. Everything was locked. Word spread fast. People began whispering. The same family that once stood proud and threw a lavish wedding with borrowed glory now stood frozen, legally and financially. The same woman they treated like an ATM had now flipped the game. She didn't beg. She billed them, and she billed them with interest. Kezia didn't smile in court. She didn't need to. Her silence had spoken. Her truth had been heard, and justice finally was on her side. They thought she would just move on quietly. Instead, she moved legally, and she made sure every single naira they misused would be paid back, with interest. The wedding had been the talk of the town. People couldn't stop talking about how beautiful it was. The decorations, the food, the expensive gown, and the fancy location. Everyone thought the family was rich and generous. But the truth behind all that shine was dark and ugly. The money that made the wedding sparkle didn't come from the family's pocket. It came from Kesia's quiet sacrifices. And now, it was time for the truth to speak louder than the music they once danced to. The sister-in-law's new husband had no clue. He thought he married into a powerful and wealthy family. He believed everything had been paid for with love and savings. But after the court case, the truth came crashing down. He found out that almost everything, from the wedding food to the bride's jewelry, was paid for by Kesia. And worse, it was done without her full consent. At first, he was shocked. Then, he was angry. "You made me stand in front of the world like a king," he said to his wife. But it was all fake. His trust in the family broke that day. He realized he had been part of a lie, and now he was stuck in the mess they made. Soon, the court orders began to take effect. The family car was taken back by the bank because they couldn't keep up with payments. Their house mortgage increased since one of the accounts they used as backup was now frozen. Bills started piling up. Everything that once felt easy now became a burden. Tibaho's siblings, who once smiled with pride, started blaming him. "You married her for help," his older brother shouted. "And now look where we are." Another sibling said, "You thought using her would fix things. Now we're all paying for your mistake." The family, which used to look strong and united on the outside, started falling apart from the inside. Secrets, blame, and shame filled the rooms where laughter once lived. No one wanted to take responsibility. Everyone was pointing fingers, but all the paths led back to the same truth. They used Kesia, and now they were paying with their peace, their money, and their reputation. The sister-in-law, once proud in her wedding dress, now sat quietly, watching everything around her fall apart. Her husband barely spoke to her. Her in-laws avoided her. The joy she once felt was now replaced with stress and fear. Kesia didn't do this to punish them. She did it to protect herself. And now, the fancy wedding they built on lies had turned into a heavy debt they would carry for years. Kesia never planned to become a public speaker. She wasn't loud, she didn't like attention, and she had spent most of her life giving quietly. But one day, she was invited to speak at a women's conference. At first, she wasn't sure she should go. What would she even say? But then she remembered everything she had been through. The lies, the disrespect, the silence, the strength it took to walk away. And she said yes. The hall was full of women from different walks of life. Some were mothers, some were business owners. Some had stories just like Kesia's, hidden deep behind quiet smiles. When Kesia stood at the podium, there were no fancy words, no anger, just truth. She spoke softly but clearly. She told them how she gave everything thinking it was love, how she kept saying yes when her heart was breaking, how she believed helping them would make them love her more. But instead, they only took more. And how one day she realized that even kindness needs boundaries. Then she said something that stayed with everyone in the room. When they call you selfish for setting boundaries, remember, banks don't give out loans without interest. Neither should your heart. There was silence at first, not the empty kind, but the kind that comes when truth hits deep. Then, slowly, the room filled with applause. Some women even stood up, wiping tears from their eyes. Because they didn't just hear Kesia, they saw themselves in her. The video of her speech was shared online. It spread like wildfire. People who once whispered that she had overreacted now said she was brave. The same neighbors who once asked why she left her marriage now nodded with respect. Kesia's calm truth had touched something in them all. And in the very back of the room, sitting alone, was Tibaho. He hadn't come to support. He came out of guilt. He thought maybe she'd attack him, shame him in public, but she didn't. She didn't even mention his name. That hurt more than anything. She had moved on, without bitterness, without needing revenge. She had grown louder, without ever raising her voice. And Tibaho? He couldn't even look her in the eye. He watched her from the shadows as the crowd celebrated her strength. He saw the woman he once ignored now become someone the world listened to. Kesia didn't need to shout to be heard. Her truth was enough. Her silence had become her power. And now, the same community that once laughed at her pain was clapping for her healing. 3 months after the court case, the family was still struggling. Bills were piling up. Accounts were frozen. And their reputation in the community had dropped. The fancy life they once showed off was gone. And then came the final blow. Their small family business, the same one they used to brag about, was put up for sale to repay the debts they owed. They had no choice. Selling it was the only way to breathe again. But what they didn't know was that someone was already watching closely. Kezia. She found out the business was on the market and didn't waste time. Quietly, without any big announcement, she met with the real estate agent, made an offer, and paid for it fully. No loans, no delays. She bought it all. The building, the name, the stock, everything. When the papers were signed, her name stood clearly as the new owner. The news hit the family like a storm. The same woman they used, lied to, and pushed aside had now bought the very thing they once held above her. It wasn't revenge. It was a reminder. You don't throw away someone who helped build your house, because one day they might own the land it sits on. Kezia didn't stop there. She changed everything about the business. New name, new look, new purpose. She didn't want to just run a shop. She wanted to build a space that meant something. She opened up positions for young women like her, women who had been used, overlooked, or made to feel small. She trained them, paid them fairly, and gave them a fresh start. And when she updated the staff handbook, she added a new rule that everyone saw on the very first page. No unpaid labor, ever, because she knew what it felt like to work without being appreciated, to give and never be thanked, to pour your heart into something and be treated like nothing. She was done with that life, and she wouldn't let anyone else go through it if she could help it. Kezia didn't need to shout her success from rooftops. Her actions spoke louder than words. She walked past people who once whispered behind her back, and now they watched her with quiet respect. And as for the family, they had to walk past the store she now owned, the one they lost, the one she brought back to life. They saw her name on the sign, shining proudly, reminding them that the one they tried to break had built herself back, stronger, wiser, and fully in charge. The store's grand reopening was full of light, laughter, and new beginnings. The sign outside had a fresh name, and inside, everything looked different, brighter, stronger, more hopeful. Kezia stood near the entrance, welcoming guests with a calm smile. She wasn't just the owner now. She was the story everyone was talking about, not because of drama, but because of her quiet rise from being used to being unstoppable. Journalists and business people had come to see the transformation, but what caught everyone's attention wasn't just the new design or the growing team of young women she had hired. It was Kezia herself. She had a quiet power now, the kind that comes from surviving something painful and choosing to build something beautiful out of it. One reporter came up to her holding a mic. "What's your advice to young wives like you?" he asked, clearly curious to hear what had given her so much strength. Kezia looked at him, then at the young women working behind the counter, smiling, chatting with customers, finally getting the respect they deserved. She took a gentle breath and answered, "Kindness is not weakness, but unguarded giving. That's bankruptcy in disguise. So now I invest in people who pour back." Her words were simple, but they struck deep. The crowd clapped. Some nodded slowly, as if they too had given too much without return. That one moment was bigger than any speech. It wasn't about revenge. It was about wisdom. Kezia had taken all the pain they caused her, all the money they misused, all the moments she was made to feel small, and turned them into something powerful. She didn't just get her money back in court. She got something more valuable: self-respect, purpose, and a legacy. She had learned the hard way that not everyone who calls you family deserves your kindness. And now, instead of being drained by others, she poured her time and love into something that grew: her business, her team, her peace. The people who once used her, they had nothing left to take, because Kezia had taken her story, the betrayal, the loss, the silence, and turned it into capital. She didn't just survive, she soared. She didn't just make them pay her back, she made her pain profitable.